Welcome to today's explainer. If you have ever felt totally overwhelmed by the sheer amount of, conflicting noise in the news or just online in general, you are absolutely in the right place. Today, we are unpacking a really practical framework from our source text called Finding Common Ground Through Reverse Azimuth. We're going to cut straight through all that static to find some real clarity. No fluff, just an incredibly solid, actionable mental model that you can literally start using right away.
So let me ask you a question that I bet you grapple with basically every single day. How do you actually decide which source of information is correct? I mean, we live in this era where we are just constantly bombarded by competing narratives. Just think about any recent major event you read about. You probably saw completely different accounts of the exact same topic, right? And honestly, figuring out how to navigate that, it can be incredibly frustrating. Fortunately, our source text gives us a very specific, structured method to handle this exact dilemma.
Okay, let's dive into this. Imagine you've got source A on one side and source B on the other. They are completely opposite, presenting entirely different viewpoints. Let's say, I don't know, it's about the economy. Source A says things are booming and points to one specific set of numbers. Source B says things are totally collapsing and points to a completely different set. Now, our natural instinct here is usually to just kind of pick the side that aligns with what we already feel, right? And then just completely ignore the other one. But the text actually challenges us to do the exact opposite. It asks us to actively engage with both. Let's look at the solution and see how this all comes together. To solve that huge clash between source A and source B, the text introduces this really fascinating concept called reverse azimuth. Essentially, it is the active process of listening to opposing sources to identify their common information and ultimately finding what to actually believe. It's this razor-sharp tool for when you need to figure out which source of information is correct, or actually, more importantly, to what extent each source is correct. So instead of blindly choosing one over the other, you are using them against each other to find the truth. Now, if you want to actually apply reverse azimuth in your daily life, here is your playbook broken down into 3 simple steps. Step 1, listen to opposite sources. Now, this means you have to actually expose yourself to both sides of an argument, which, let's be real, takes a lot of deliberate effort. Step 2, actively try to identify the common information that both of those sources are presenting. And finally, step 3, establish what to believe based entirely on that overlap. It is just a remarkably structured approach to consuming information in what is, frankly, a pretty chaotic world. So, the crucial point here really is step number 2, the area of common information. This right here is the absolute engine of the reverse azimuth framework because you aren't just passively listening, You are actively scanning. You're taking in those opposing narratives and systematically stripping away the noise, the rhetoric, the finger-pointing, and you are hunting for the exact points where those two sources actually agree. That overlap, that shared data, that becomes your rock-solid foundation. Once you have done that scanning, you essentially split the information into 2 buckets in your mind. First, you've got the shared information, that common ground we just established. Then you have the rest of information. As an objective observer using reverse azimuth, you're just constantly sorting what you hear into these 2 distinct categories. You're deliberately isolating those overlapping, agreed-upon facts away from the subjective extremes presented by either party. It's almost like having a mental sorting hat for data. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what we need to do with that rest of information bucket. The source actually gives a very stark warning about this. It states that everything outside of that shared center may be, quote, highly polluted by their own partialities and biases. Just think about that phrasing for a second. Highly polluted. By recognizing this pollution on the outer edges of the arguments, we give ourselves full permission to just confidently set those biased extremes aside. We don't have to carry the weight of their spin anymore. When you finally filter out all those partialities, you are left with 2 incredibly powerful benefits. First, you get an area of common information that gives you something real, something grounded to actually believe in. An anchored fact to hold on to amidst all the chaos. Second, you can use that common ground to actively steer the conversation. Instead of getting bogged down in those polluted extremes, you become an anchor yourself. You can move discussions forward based on shared reality, basically demanding that everyone works from the exact same set of agreed-upon facts. Which brings us to our final thought for today's explainer. The next time 2 sources collide in your daily life, will you get lost in the pollution or will you find your reverse azimuth? It is an absolutely empowering mental model to carry around with you. By deliberately seeking out that common information and systematically discarding the biased extremes, you take back control of how you process the world. Thank you so much for joining me. And hey, I highly encourage you to put this framework to the test the very next time you read the news.